Hi, welcome to your second practical of the year. Okay, so today we are doing practical 2, which is the separation of pigments in a mixture, which is essentially paper chromatography. So what do you need to do? So first, it says take a strip of filter paper, and it says take a scissors and cut it such that you get this. Does it have to be 1.5 cm cube from the bottom? Not necessary. Roughly you will do. Okay, next it says draw a line with a pencil about 1.5 cm from the bottom. It should look like this. Okay, next it says mark a small dot of the mixture. Okay, I know that the instruction says use the flat side, but actually I prefer that you use the sharp side. This means that the dot is smaller and your results are clearer, you can separate nicer. The ink mixture, yeah. So at this point you should have something that look like this. Okay, next you will add distilled water into a boiling tube. So this is a boiling tube. So of course with any apparatus you should first wash it. You wash it with tap water. Followed by distilled water. Okay, it says add distilled water, which is the solvent, to about a depth of 1 cm. Again, this is just a rough estimate. The main point is that later on, when this filter paper goes in, the ink, the line where the ink is on should be above the solvent. So you need to use some common sense and adjust accordingly. Okay, next, you insert it in. How? You use this thing called a split cork. So you use the cork and make sure that it's tight, after which you insert it in carefully. This is good, where you can see that the ink is here, the water level is here, and the tip is touching the water level. After which, it will be a long duration where it separates. So we should put it down straight on the test tube rack and leave it. In the meanwhile, move on and do the other practicals. So the other practicals that we are doing today is, last practical, remember we did the copper 2 sulfate, we prepared the salt. And I told you that you should leave it in the vial so that you can measure it this week. So this week we are going to measure it. How are we going to do it? So let me show you. So this would be how your sample look like. So recall how do you fold a filter paper. Take a filter paper, you fold half. Then you fold half again. So it should look like a quadrant. Then you open one of the flaps, and it should look something like this. If, like this case, the filter paper does not stay in place because it's not wet, you can use your distilled water to just moisten it a bit, such that it will remain in place. After which, you take your sample in the vial and transfer them over entirely, including all the crystals. So this process will take a while. After a long time, you'll be left with your crystals, and you can pour them out onto pieces of filter paper. And the very last step is to make sure that it's dry. So take another piece of filter paper and gently press it to ensure that it's dry. After which, you will proceed to weigh the mass of your crystals and the electronic balance. And that's about it for experiment determining the purity of the sodium hydrogen carbonate. So now we will measure 1.5 gram of your solid in a test tube. So this is known as a electronic balance. So you switch it on. What do? You will place your test tube in and measure the mass of your test tube. Record this down in your paper. After which you are supposed to add 1.5 gram of about 1.5 gram of solid. So my trick to you is you can actually press, you can tear it. After which then you add about 1.5. If you have 1.4, 1.6 is perfectly fine. And you have about 1.51 gram, that's good enough. And with this you can proceed to heating this sample. Okay, so now you will heat the sample. So can you heat your sample using your bare hands like this? No, it's very hot, so you should be using a test tube holder. Make sure that you clamp the top of the test tube and you can heat it. So let's do a quick recap of how to light the Bunsen burner. So ensure that the air hole is almost completely closed, leave a very tiny gap. Then you should turn on your gas tap to the max and you turn it on. There you have it. After which, the instruction says that you will heat your sample for 3 minutes. This is unlike the normal practical where you need to constantly move to ensure that the substance don't get overheated. This is a solid. Nothing will spurt out. So you can just heat it about 3 minutes. And once you are done with it, you can turn off the flame and ensure that you do not touch any of this with your bare hands. It's very, very hot. So imagine after 3 minutes, you will place this down on your test tube rack and let it cool down before you proceed to measure it at the electronic scale. And make sure you switch off, never leave flame unattended, and that's about it. You don't touch this at all. Alright? And the very final part of the experiment is when your chromatography is done. So when do you stop? So the cork is about here. So when you notice that the solvent have risen up to about a few centimeters from near the cork, you should remove it, because the separation will continue even though you remove everything. So you remove it. It's wet, but it's perfectly fine. You can put it on a surface and just let it dry up. After which you will staple it to your worksheet. So if the solvent stops at this point, eventually you should take a pencil and draw this line, and this is your solvent front. You'll need this for your calculation later on. And with that, that's about it for your practical session.